Hello, Kenny. How are you?
Thank God. How are you?
Wonderful.
Great to
I
see you.
cannot believe how much feedback we got from the last episode.
I'm not surprised because the Weiss brothers are rock stars, as I call them, and but it was great. Yeah, I heard from so many people. I think also, Yisroel, that we're picking up some steam, and a lot of people are listening now. So it's a combination of great guests and great topic, and also just we're growing leaps and bounds.
Leaps and bounds.
We're huge. We're the number 74 kosher wine podcast. No, I'm just kidding.
So, to start off today's episode, by the way,
Yes.
episode 9, I can't believe it. Um, I have a first segment that I want to do. Okay, I'm gonna read this. You may get it right away. I'm gonna read this wine bottle, and I want
Okay.
to see if you can guess it. It's okay if you can't guess it, because I just want to discuss this with you, even if you can't. Are you ready
Okay.
for this? This is on a wine bottle. I
I
have it in
never,
my
I don't like looking dumb, so don't make me look dumb, but go ahead. Let's try it.
In the beginning, there is inspiration. It starts inside, a yearning, inexhaustible, that drives us toward innovation, step after step, investing every resource until the intangible becomes incredible. At the end is a feeling inexpressible, except that inscribed into each iteration is the passion it took to make it real. Look inside, you will see it in the wine.
I always thought I should become a wine writer, and I don't know if I could write that. Um, and you want me to guess which wine this is?
I don't think you'll guess it, but
No,
what do you think? This is okay. This is on the front of this bottle. It's a Herzog Chenin.
I would not have guessed that, by the way.
It was a really popular bottle. It was all over the place,
Right, right. It was
and
popular. That's true.
yeah, I mean it's not around anymore. It's a couple years old.
Is that not around anymore, that Chenin?
I haven't seen it in a while.
They make that Baron Herzog Chenin Blanc, which
Right.
I'm assuming that's Chenin Blanc, right? I don't remember exactly.
It's a Chenin Blanc from
Yeah.
California. They had a Zinfandel as well that was called the ZN or the Zin.
Right, right, right. I
This is
remember.
called like the Shen In.
So interestingly about those wines, back in the days when a group of my friends locally would play poker together, that was considered poker wine, meaning like it doesn't matter what you're drinking at that point, which is why we were using it. We also, if you remember that short-lived box of wine, that
It
giant
was the
box,
same wine. That was
it
the
was
same
that
wine.
wine,
Yeah.
right? And you're right. I guess I don't see that anymore, but I think that's probably a blessing. Nothing personal, people at Herzog.
No,
Um,
we love you, and I think that somebody really worked hard on this on these words.
That's yeah, that's like what's probably good and bad about a lot of wine labels, a lot of the language on wine labels and even wine notes, these interchangeable words. And does that really even mean anything? You
Right.
could put that on any package like that wine label. You could write that on anything. But yes, very flowery. I would never have guessed that in a million years that that was on that bottle. So you got me on that one. By the way, I like your background. Very
It's
scholarly.
it's not a background, it's my library. I'm actually sitting in my
No,
library.
I mean I know it's a real one. I know it's not a fake one,
Yeah,
but
this is actually not my entire library. This actually is much bigger than this, but yeah, I love this space. It makes me happy. It brings me
I
joy.
agree. There's nothing better than being surrounded by books and wine, but books and wine.
Yes,
That should be that could we could open that store.
absolutely.
I know you bring us up because the topic we chose to talk about today was including the wine bottle. It's in that general vein, is the wine bottle enclosure. Like
Yes.
what that great world of what closes your treasured bottle of wine. And I think, we discussed whether this would even be such an interesting topic. I personally am very interested in it. I think so many people don't really know what goes into it. People don't necessarily understand what causes cork taint, which we'll talk about a little bit,
Mhm.
and the faults and why different enclosures are chosen versus others. I mean, I think it's an interesting topic.
Let's, from the onset, get rid of the myth. The myth of the screw cap. Good or
Okay.
bad for the wine?
Oh, I didn't realize I thought you were about to launch into a whole pro screw cap thing. You know, Mark Starr, the winemaker for Six Parallel South in Australia, very passionate guy. He used to get, and I learned more about this when I was reading about this morning. I learned about probably a little behind why, but he was very like passionate about the use of screw caps on wine, and there's a lot of what's it called proof to what he's saying is that it's for the most part a smarter enclosure than cork. I think if you're talking about why you're using it, then screw caps for wines that are meant to be drunk young is for sure a better enclosure. I think the biggest reason. So let me just back up for a second. What I wanted to finish about Mark Starr was that he's Australian. The preponderance of screw caps is in Australia and New Zealand. I think New Zealand now is like 95% New Zealand wines are screw caps. And you can think about even the ones that we drink, like Dwyer's Creek. That has
Yes.
a screw cap on it. And those are wines that are meant to be drunk young and to really control the aromatics. You don't want that release of gas or any of that kind of thing, or oxygen introduced. You want to really maintain all the aromatics of those wines, right?
Someone
So,
told me,
and in fact, there was a major push in Australia and New
yeah,
Zealand, even more specifically, to get rid of corks, to get
someone
rid of.
told me the reason why they do that there is because there's not a lot of cork oak tree.
I mean,
It's
I'm
accepted.
sure I'm sure, but they probably it's expensive to import them.
Right.
Almost all the cork in the world comes from like that Mediterranean, like
Hmm.
really Portugal is the main place, but Spain also, like very specific environment. It's very finicky tree that like needs the right amount of waterfall and so on and so forth. And a couple of interesting things I learned about cork trees. Number one, I had to write this down because I wouldn't remember it. Um, oh, I wrote it. Mainly in Portugal, 2 million acres, which is a third of the world's cork trees are like in Portugal, right?
Wow.
What's interesting is that it takes 25 years for a cork tree to produce, because what people don't know maybe is that the cork comes from the bark of the tree. They basically are just punching out holes right from the bark. But it takes 25 years to get to be able to become a commercially viable bark that they can use to punch that cork out. It's really just punched out, like in like really premium corks. That's what they use, right? And then they can't do it again for another 9 or 10 years. So a lot of these trees are 200 years old. What they find also is that after 200, 250 years, the tree does not produce anymore. So you're getting maybe 10, 10 uses or so. Am I doing that math right?
Yeah.
Out of a cork tree's bark. So this is a very complicated process of like how they even get them. And it explains why the expense in it also. But what I think is so cool about it is that two things. Number one is that the idea is that like this God-made product is still the perfect product. It's really like because part of it is not just okay, we have this cork and it's 200 years ago they weren't able to produce screw caps, but they had the cork and they used it. But what they learned, and I read Jancis Robinson said, is that the oxygen, like the transfer of what's happening inside and outside of the bottle, going in and out, is what's like really best about cork. That is a pro or maybe a con of it also, meaning there's what's good and bad about that because also wine can get too much oxygen. But cork is like I think it's really like the perfect God made enclosure. Everything we try to do to try to perfect it is not necessarily perfecting it, even though the screw cap for certain wines is really, to me, I think makes the most sense. But people Love the pop of the cork.
Pop. Though it's romantic, it's ceremonial, it's visceral, it's become a ritual, the pop. And no matter what you say, oh no, I can't take a screw cap. Oh no, I need a cork. Oh, the wine's probably not good if it doesn't have a cork.
Don't you even like have that implicit bias that you think like, screw top, probably a cheaper wine, without even knowing
Absolutely.
that's the first thing you see, like that must be a cheaper wine. Don't you
Absolutely.
think? Yeah,
And there are many fine wines that have screw tops now.
I'm sure there are. I in the kosher world, I can't think of um I shouldn't say not fine wines, not expensive wines that I see with screw tops. I can't think of them. Can you? I don't think of any examples off the top of my head. But well-made wines for sure.
I
Yeah,
think
there was
uh
some.
I
Yeah,
think Tabor did a higher end white series that was screw top that I could think of.
it's
Uh,
interesting because white wine is more, they say, affected by oxygen and probably has more benefits using a screw cap than red wine because red wine, the tannin helps like protect the wine itself. And
yeah,
also even in like in sweet wines and dessert wines, the sugar helps protect it. But
I mean, I
white
was
wine
really
is
surprised. I really like the new Sauvignon Blanc from Dalton. They're 2023. I think that
great.
it's one of the best vintages that I like it's a little fumé, so I like that, like the peatiness of it.
It's
And
great.
this is the first time they've used a screw cap.
It's I That's interesting. I didn't realize that, but that's I agree. Great wine, and I've been recommending that to a lot of people.
It's by far the best vintage that I can remember of that wine. And it's interesting that it's the first time that they've gone that way. And it's a beautiful little screw cap they have with the nice Dalton symbol on top of it, black. It looks good, but they went away from the cork. So
Right.
let's talk about the cork because I think that it would be wrong for us to talk about any wine stoppers of any sort without talking about the cork properly.
First, talking about traditional cork, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, why is cork? So we know the tree, uh, Spain, Portugal,
Mhm.
200-year-old trees, they're very well protected. Why do we use the cork?
So, like I said, I think that the biggest um, pro in using natural cork is that very specific ability to a cork to, allow small introduction of gas and the opposite. Meaning you'll even find sometimes one of the faults of a screw cap is that some wines do need to release certain gas, like as they're in the bottle, may still need to do that. And that ends up getting trapped. And those are bottles you'll find like a sulfuric smell in, like a rotten egg,
Hmm.
which is a major fault for a wine. And that's part of the reason if they're because it's just getting trapped in there. And that would not have happened necessarily with a natural cork. But an interesting thing is that natural cork is expansive. And glass, people may not realize, with hot and cold also expands and contracts. And the cork itself will move along with it. That you won't find with a synthetic cork, which is a fixed size. And that you do find with it. So that's another interesting reason, something I learned.
But why do you think the cork is falling apart? Because if you open up a wine that's been aged a little while, you're going to often, I always say you have to do surgery on that bottle. You have to like really know how to open that bottle because that cork will fall apart in your hands.
Right. Well, I mean, a cork is a natural product, so there's going to be natural flaws in it, and they may have a little crack in it. And you'll see, yeah, on those really old bottles, you may see the cork that the whole side of it there may have been a vein in it, which was like kind of taking in the wine. And of course, the liquid in the cork ultimately will kind of break apart the cork itself, and it can crumble that way.
Yeah.
Um, Here's an interesting thing that just popped into my head also is that it's and this is not as simple as I used to think, but the old idea of storing a wine on its side, what is the reason we're told to do that? The reason we're told to do that, go ahead.
To keep it connected to the cork.
correct, and that it keeps it moist, and that the cork itself won't dry out because a cork can dry out too. It's wood, but I've read more recently that it's not necessarily true that it's better off on its side. We're going to do an episode on aging and storage, and we're going to get into that because I found that like kind of fascinating, that
Fascinating.
whole idea. And I think because everyone's like, of course it goes on its side, right? Dark, cool place on its side, and like and every bad story you have about wine was found upright under someone's sink, right? So,
Well,
but
I think there's a big difference between storing it on its side and putting it near the oven.
well, that's true. That's very true. Um,
So let's talk about the cons of the cork, the TSA. Sorry, the TCA.
yeah, right. So TCA, do you know that off the top of your head what the name of the molecule is? It's something like 246. I'm not looking at this. I don't remember. Trichlor or something.
I know it
And
was on one of my exams.
right. But we call it TCA. That's the easier thing to remember. And TCA is also known as cork taint. And when you hear somebody talk about that a bottle is corked, that's what it's supposed to mean. People use the word corked meaning other things, like anytime they find weird smells, and sometimes those smells are, an example is like we talked about recently is the Brett. Brett is very different than TCA. In fact, Brett is a lot of people seek it out. Brett is something that gives character. Some people are very turned off by it. TCA is a fault. By anyone you ask, it's a fault. It's going to smell like moldy basement or wet newspaper.
Or
And where
rubber
does it come
or
from?
rubber band-aid sometimes.
Right. But and where does it come from? It comes from the actual cork. So this is something interesting, is that you see people always do this, and I don't know where I learned this long ago not to do it. Now I see the reason why there is to do it is that when you pull the cork out of the bottle, do you do this or not? When you pop that cork, do you smell the cork?
Always.
You do, right? I
Always
learned not
do.
to do that a long time ago, and I don't remember why I learned not to do that, but it's a good way to detect TCA right away, is because
Yes.
that's where you're going to find it most often, is right on the cork.
I used
Like,
to sit in Montreal with a group of sommeliers, like old sommeliers, like really French. And so they always did that.
I always
So
did that.
since then I always did it
I feel like some winemaker like told me not to do that. I don't know where I picked that up. Who
because
knows
he
where
didn't want you to smell the TCA.
that could be. Could be.
So
But the
where does it?
TCA comes from the cork itself, and why? Because they think there's a lot of geeky stuff behind TCA and where it comes from, but there was a major kind of a rise of understanding of it in the 80s and 90s. Part of the reason is because a lot of pesticides were used in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and it's a compound that interacts with the cork, and then is triggered, interestingly, by one of the processes of making the cork, which is when they first cut it, they wash it right away, or it's also called bleaching. It's not actually bleach; they use something else, but they do that for two reasons: to get rid of the dust on it, and number two, was it number two reason? I'm forgetting number two reason,
I don't
but
remember.
they would wash it that way, and that chemical that they were using was interacting with the insecticides that were still in the cork itself. So
It was
they
like some
were
kind of
really
fungi,
finding
right?
a
It
lot. Sorry,
was some kind of fungi that was in the cork.
right? And then it was kind of interacting with that and causing that. But they in 1981 was when they determined TCA and what exactly it was to start being able to detect it. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't show up until the wine's already in the bottle, you
Right.
know. So, but there have been solutions to TCA. One of them is a screw cap. We don't have a TCA problem. We use screw caps.
Well,
And because
yeah.
here's a crazy number, by the way, is that research shows that 3% or more, even up to 5-6% of all corked bottles are affected by TCA. It's a crazy number.
Wow.
It's a crazy number. That's like 1 in 20, 1 in 30,
What
and a
percentage
billion
of
plus
bottles do you
bottles
think are
of wine a
corked?
year. Sorry?
What percentage of bottles do you think are corked?
I mean, I believe that. I think that's like they've done a lot of research on that.
Yeah.
3 to 5% of bottles are corked. Um, I would say that That makes sense to me. I think I find, especially in older bottles and made with real cork, I think at 1 out of 25, 30 bottles, maybe less, maybe 1 out of 50 bottles, but yeah, find it a fair amount, don't
Yeah,
you?
a lot.
Interesting thing. Interesting thing. I've said interesting things so many times in this podcast.
Oh,
But I,
I was gonna tell everybody at the end of the podcast for a drinking game. When you listen to
yes,
the podcast, you should
right.
just every time you hear an interesting thing from Kenny, you should just think
Right.
of
Well, someone told me I'm saying 100% too much. I think that was my wife. She's like, stop saying 100%. Like every time I agree with you, I'm like 100%. She's like, stop saying that so much. So I'm thinking about that one, but now I'll think about interesting also.
wives
But
are good for that kind of stuff.
well, sorry.
Wives are good for
Oh
those kind of
yes.
comments on a podcast.
I'm like, but did you like it otherwise? Um, so cork taint and that TCA thing, humans have a very distinct ability to smell it. It's like the number is something like 2 to 5 parts in a trillion a human being can smell. And an interesting idea behind that, I think, that I read is that humans are very attuned to things that also, I think God given. Scientists would say it's evolution, but we have innate ability to detect mold. Why? Because it can hurt us, most
Mhm.
likely. So when you smell that, even very small amounts of it, your brain just triggers something to not ingest it. So you're very tuned into these kind of moldy type of smells. So 2 parts to 5 parts in a trillion,
Wow.
very small amounts, very, very small amounts. It's something like, I read something like a teaspoon in 5 swimming pools or something like crazy like that.
True.
But there are people that don't really pick it up.
Yeah.
It's like it's not something everyone can do.
I hate the smell of wet dog, and to me, just the cork smells like wet dog if there's too much
Mhm.
of the TCAs in it, and I know right away. I'm like, this is finished.
Yeah, I agree. You know, the first time I was like very serious about wine, and I understood what TCA was, and I detected it. I had read there are some like tricks that are some people believe work, some people don't, and one of them is to take a wad of Saran wrap, ball it up, and put it into the decanter of the corked wine, and it absolutely helps. Like I mean, I did it twice and found it really helped. It's a mess and it doesn't totally get rid of it. You're still going to taste it a little bit. So if you're really sensitive to that, now, also you don't get sick from it. It's a fungi or mold or that type of thing, but it does not harm you. It just makes it unpleasant to drink.
Yeah, especially when it's a Shemitah wine.
Yes. Well, that's a real problem. That is a real problem. That's why you got to be careful with those Shemitah wines.
Yeah, if it's a cork Shemitah wine, you got to drink the whole thing to the last drop.
It's yes, you got to be careful with those.
So
Here's the
let's
thing with that, by
yeah.
the way. What do you do with a bubbly that's a Shemitah wine when you open it and like it's always possible some of it can be lost?
So
Do you have to
I
open
very careful with it. I mean, this is a whole different conversation, and Shemitah is
it?
not for 6 years,
Yes.
but I'm very careful with it, and I only will open a Shemitah wine if I have enough people that if everyone gets a little drop, we can finish the bottle. Because there's always that. I've had it. I've had it. I remember once at my Seder, we opened the Shemitah wine. We thought it was beautiful. It's Pesach. It's a
Yeah.
great opportunity to open a Shemitah wine.
Yeah.
And it
And
was
then it
totally
was
corked.
wow.
And we all just went around and we said, this is for God.
Right. Wow. See, that never happened to me. That's trouble. But at least you had other people with you.
Let's talk
So
about
one of the other
yeah.
solutions to this whole like TCA problem has been the advent over the last 20 years of what's called an agglomerated cork, which is the most famous trade name is Diam,
Mm.
Diam, which which they say gets rid of the problem of TCA. Now, and also it controls the wine they think better over the years. Now, there's no real track run of this. This again is only I think it's 2005 that company was founded. So a lot of the biggest producers in the world are not, and I'm not talking kosher. A lot of the biggest non-kosher producers in the world are not like they're not sold on this thing yet. What they do is they
The
take
French producers do not like it.
Well, they don't like change in general. But I think like the white Burgundy, I think they're starting to use it because like I said earlier, these white wines are affected more commonly. But Diam is not a synthetic cork. It's made from cork. What they do is they chop up cork. They take without getting scientific about it, they take the best parts of it and then they mix it with some kind of, I think something like the
It's
solution.
like
Like
IKEA furniture for
it's
corks.
it's kind of like that. I think it's they don't want you to think that, but right. You know, it's funny because when I see a Diam cork, it just seems cheaper. It's not cheaper, and it's obviously a lot of technology goes into it because then they mix it with some kind of something that's used in contact lenses, then they glue it all together,
Yeah.
right? The kosher producers that I know off the top of my head that use it are Carmel, Covenant uses it, and then the French wineries Chateau Ocandisa and Chateau Giraud. Like I
And
know
I
that
think
those
I
companies.
know a lot of the South American producers use it.
Who
A
does?
lot of the South American producers, like if you get some of those
Oh,
the
are they
Chilean
using
wines,
Diam?
Argentinian wines, you see it often there. It's like they call it an agglomerated cork, right?
Agglomerated cork. And
Yeah.
something you'll notice on it, next time you open one of these, look at the cork. It'll say Diam on it, but then it'll have a number following it. It'll say Diam 2, 3, 5, or 10. And that's like their guarantee of how many years that they guarantee that the wine will be good that many years. So the
You only
most
know once you open it. You're like, darn, that was a
right,
Diam 10. I could have kept this 4 more years.
that's true. But they're only putting those on expensive wines because those are more expensive. Those an interesting thing about cork though, it's one of the rare things that is environmentally the best out of all these things we're talking about. That's the best one, and that's the old one. Meaning, a lot of things are like, well, we're changing this because of environment, we're changing that because of environment. Cork is still it's a reproducible and biodegradable thing. It's just an interesting fact. You know, I read a story just yesterday that in Europe, I don't know how anyone even lives in Europe, but that in Europe, that Coca-Cola and I guess the other companies were forced to use this. They use the screw cap, but because of recycling, they force the cap cannot. You know when you open a bottle, it comes off the cap. In Europe, it does not anymore. It's attached to the thing. People are poking their eyes and scratching themselves because they want the whole piece to be recycled. So I'm like, I'm wondering, as I was reading that, I'm like, is that the future of wine also? Screw caps that are attached that you can't even remove from the bottle itself? Probably not, but it was
I
just,
hope not.
it's, you know, I'm just saying with all the changes because of environmental laws and whatever, it's funny that the most environmental of all of the enclosures is the cork, the natural cork.
Yeah. Let's talk about the big elephant in the cork room, the synthetic cork.
Is it though? I don't know. I mean, I think synthetic corks are made from different products. They're not made from wood. They're made from essentially from plastics, I think.
Yeah, they're petroleum.
Yeah, petroleum. So I guess it's an elephant in from a environmental perspective, but it's probably most commonly used on less expensive wines and wines that are not meant to be aged because yeah, that's one of the problems is that they are not going to allow that, you know, transfer of gases. But again, on a bottle, again, we'll say one of the biggest misconceptions of wine drinkers, and I'm saying even experienced wine drinkers, is thinking that every bottle they buy should go in their cellar. The
Right.
vast majority of wines are not meant to age. The vast majority of wines are meant,
Especially vast majority of kosher wines. Well, that's all we know.
yeah. And I would say we're talking 90 plus percent, 95% even of wines that are really meant to drink now. So once you get to that number, then why not use number one, the cheapest enclosure, or number two, the best one for a short term, like, you know, that are really going to, let's say, like I discussed before with keeping the aromatics of a white wine. Why not use the one that will hold that best? So synthetic may be an option for that too. Of course, considering it's plastic, that's going to become an enemy of the environmental world,
Right.
right? And also, it doesn't expand and contract like we talked about before with the
Which
natural cork.
which is my biggest problem because you can't put it back on the bottle.
Cannot put it back in the bottle.
It's my biggest problem. I dislike the
Nightmare.
synthetic cork because you can't reseal it, which means you got to finish the bottle or get your own. It's just complicated. Why is it so complicated?
Well, it shouldn't be, but that's why. It's because there's no expansion of it. I mean, think about cork itself. It's so more moldable when you play around with it. It's very like it has the capacity to, to move that synthetics don't have because that's just petroleum and glue and whatever else it is. But what was I going to say? One more thing about that. Anyway, go ahead. I can't remember where I was going with that.
So there's a couple of other enclosures that I'm just thinking about off the top of my head. There's the Vino Seal. I don't know a kosher wine with it, but I know a lot of a glass stopper.
Oh, yeah, Vinolok is one of them.
That's right.
I looked that up this morning to like, but I knew one off my head, and then we have this like wine WhatsApp chat, and I asked in there if anyone knew other examples, and someone mentioned another one I forgot about, but
Does the Mademoiselle have a Vino Seal?
Sorry,
I think the Mademoiselle from
that's what I thought right away, and then I'm not sure. I think so. I think it has. So what this is a glass. It looks more like a decanter that you would say use for whiskey, and it has this glass top with like a rubber that's molded into it, and it really produces a hermetic seal, meaning there's nothing going in and out of that bottle. So yes, I think the Mademoiselle uses it, but the two I know use it is Bat Shlomo
Mhm.
uses it on their rosé, and I think one of their white wines, maybe a Sauvignon Blanc,
and
and
on their and on
Raziel.
their whole line of those private collections
Right.
too. Yeah.
Okay. And the Raziel uses it on their rosé. The Raziel, which is from Castel, the Castel's sister winery. I don't know if it's a sister winery, but the attached winery to Castel, the Raziel, which they make great wine too. So that's two where you find that. And it seems very fancy and with
It is
something like that,
such a good looking bottle. Come on,
beautiful.
admit
It's
it. It's a
beautiful.
beautiful bottle, and you can reuse it. Talk about sustainability.
A lot of people do that. I was at someone's house for lunch and I was like, that's such a good idea. They were using it as like their water bottle on their
Hmm.
Shabbos table. And I was like, that's such a good idea. It's yes, reusability. But you don't see it that often because its biggest con, aside from aging, which is not, those are not meant to age, but for short-term wines, the biggest con of it is expense. It's expensive. I mean, think about that versus just some synthetic cork. So it's an expensive top. So that's its biggest con. But yeah, for that, it's a beautiful. I've started. People always ask me to pick out wines for weddings and whatever, and I think I mentioned this a different time. But like most people who don't really care about wine, the bottle, how it looks, is so important, right? So maybe more winemakers should consider that. And as much as like the wine lover in me wants to think like, who even cares what that looks like? It only matters what the wine tastes like. It's like that matters to a lot of people. And you know what? Wineries are businesses. They have to sell wine to
Right.
be sustainable. So that it should and does matter. So
And then, of course, we have to mention this, though we've mentioned this before, but if we're going to top off all of our wine toppers, the crown cap. We spoke about it we'll talk about the pet knots,
the pet
but
knots, right?
but the sparkling crown cap.
Right, which is essentially like a beer cap or like an old school soda cap is you'll find on the Dalton pet knot, the Jezreel, the Yafo, like that's a common enclosure you'll find on the pet knots. And why, as we discussed, because they're not under the same amount of internal pressure that traditional bubblies are, like especially champagne style, which is under the most pressure, even more than, like Prosecco, which is a little less. But even then, you find that cork, and even not just the cork, the wire cage around it holding it in. Next time you open this from WSET, but anyone listening, when you open any, real bubbly like champagne or method champagne, any of these kind of real sparkling wines, keep your thumb on top of that cork because it can really explode. It can.
My kids love doing that. It goes right to the ceiling.
That's right. That's amazing. Yeah,
I always let my kids open those bottles, and they're so good at it. They get it right to the ceiling.
you shoot it at your sibling, don't you?
Yeah, exactly.
I am always worried about like hurting someone that I really avoid getting it near anyone. So that's the last thing I need. It sounds like a horrible ending to your Shabbos lunch.
Oh, that's exactly. But I always, I mean, they're we do this in a contained environment. We make sure they're far from the table. We make sure they're not going to get into anyone's eyes, and then they can have fun and they can get the cork up to the ceiling.
You mentioned earlier about the difficulty to get the synthetic corks back in the bottle. Some people have said that with the Diam corks too. And something I didn't realize also is that all these corks are coated with silicone or paraffin type thing to be able to slide them in and out of the bottle. But the synthetic ones are just absolutely impossible. I mean,
They're just not. There's no durability there. There's no flexibility.
right.
I
But
mean, yeah.
I guess they want you to finish the wine in that sitting, even if it's no good.
Did we? I think I can't think of any other ones. The only one I could think of was like the port, like the capped cork. The plastic with the cork that there is used in port wine.
Oh yeah, occasionally you'll see those. Yeah. Yeah, I think we covered most of them. I mean, certainly I always just I think that whole idea of like the cork taint and why you see different enclosures and the advent of the agglomerated, I think it's important to understand a lot of those things. Um, we're a little short on time today. I want to just let's talk about one more thing. Did you over the last week, what was the most interesting or notable wine you had? If you don't have one, that's fine. I could talk about one. But did you have one?
Did I have one? Yes, I did two wine tastings last week, and what was one that stuck out? Could you say yours, and I'm going to think about it.
Well, I had two, but I'll mention this one. And I think I'll talk about the other one on a different episode. But I very much enjoyed the new sparkling wine from Bina. It's a Blanc de Blanc. It's made in the Champagne method. It's made from Chardonnay. And Beano Winery is a winery in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And he's an interesting guy that we should talk to at some point. Kevin Dana, young winery, and this is his second vintage. It's the 2021, and I really, really liked it. And in fact, I think I was validated because just a couple days ago, he entered the wine. Not he didn't enter it a couple days ago, but just a couple days ago, they had a Pennsylvania. They called it sommelier competition, Pennsylvania competition. He entered that wine and it won best sparkling wine. Now this is of course a non-kosher competition. He entered and he won the best sparkling wine in Pennsylvania. So I felt very
Um,
validated that I guess my taste buds are pretty good.
and you like the bubbly.
I love bubbly. It's yeah, I go through trends. I mean, like this is I'm a big Riesling guy, and for a long time, if people are like, "What's your favorite wine?" I'm like Riesling, and especially like aged Riesling. But I love bubbly. I really I love all forms of bubbly. So meaning I don't it doesn't have to be champagne method. I like prosecco. It just I like it on the dry side, but I really his so this is champagne style, and while he does age it on the lees, the dead yeast cells, which gives it a yeasty character, it's a little bit of a fresher style. It's not. I would say it's the ones that I can think about that I think are the best values for champagne method wines in the kosher world. I would include this now, or that, the Gilgal, which is basically impossible to beat because of its price, even though it's gotten more expensive. It's fantastic wine. And then, of course, the Yarden Blanc de Blanc, which is a little more the traditional, like really yeasty style than something like this, which has a little bit of a fresher profile. I really enjoyed it. So big recommend from me. Hard to find. I don't think he made so many of them. I think he made 58 cases and I currently own two of them. So
Wow. Wow. Okay, I haven't had it, and I have seen his wine. I had one of
gotta
his wines
get you
from
that.
last vintage, but I haven't had that one, and it sounds absolutely amazing. So I was just as you're talking, I was thinking of just one wine that stuck out for me from one of my tastings. Uh, we opened the Jezreel Icon 18.
Tell me about
What
that.
what a great bottle of wine. So you and I spoke about this many times. It's really at its like I would say it's drinking like open if you have that Jezreel Icon 18, open it now because it's drinking beautifully. Maybe it's got another year or two on its life before it starts going south. That's at least my opinion. Um, and it's just very reminiscent of Jezreel. It's their flagship wine. It's very large fruit, lots of earth, very even tannins. I like also what happened to it, which I haven't had in a little while, but it really lost a lot of that initial acidity, or for some of you, that bite that some people don't like on those higher end wines. And it lost that, and it's really like already starting to show its age.
What
And
vintage was this, did you say?
the 18,
18.
yeah. And I just thought it was just very inky, very, it's a strong. I also love, and again, we were talking about bottles. Bottle doesn't matter. I love when those higher end wines are in those really heavy, like really, like you feel
You
like
do
it's
like that.
I do,
Yeah.
because I feel like you're spending a lot of money on that bottle, and
Right.
you feel like you're picking up like, oh God, that's heavy. I mean, I gotta recycle that.
Yeah, right, exactly. It's so interesting that you say that because I agree with you. I feel like that wine probably should look its part. Now, there's obviously a line, some wines go way over with the gold labels and like that kind of stuff. That stuff I feel like is nonsense. But but I also understand when like I want him to not him, I want the winemaker, the winery to keep it as affordable as possible. And you're paying for that heavy bottle, of
Yeah,
course,
yeah.
because they're expensive. But I agree. It feels like more chashuv that way, when
I,
it's like
I will say that Jezreel Icon is my favorite blend. It's Syrah Carignan.
Syrah Carignan.
I love that blend. Like
I
large fruit, good
yeah.
earth. It's got like, especially Israel, like Israeli Syrah Carignan. It's
Yeah,
great.
I Carignan is I think still an undermined, underutilized grape in Israel. It's fantastic, and I think it's really appropriate for the climate. And Jezreel is very good about using grapes that are appropriate and indigenous.
Yeah.
So more power to them.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know what Carignan is, it looks like when you read it, it's Carignan.
Or it depends where it's from, because you
Yeah,
may in Spain Cariñena, but yeah, if it looks and sounds like that, then it's probably the same grape.
absolutely. Yeah. That's always you know the litmus test, right? When somebody says they know about wine and you're like, tell me, what's the first question you ask them if they say they know about wine?
I I don't ever believe anyone when they say they know about wine, but
It's the
I
it's the
probably
best first
yeah.
question. You ready
Say
for this
again.
one? What's the difference between the Shiraz and the Syrah grape?
And what do people say?
You know if they know. It's the easiest, most basic question to ask.
Right, right. I wrote that as well, that wasn't the title. It was but I wrote about uh, Syrah and Shiraz. I'm
Yeah,
getting
say
confused
that
with
five times fast.
Shiraz Winery because of
Yeah.
last week. Um, yeah, I think the question I get most is what's the best wine or something like that. I don't even know what to
There's
say to
one
that.
answer to that question. The best
Well,
wine is the wine you like.
correct. That's exactly what I answer. That's it. And people walk away frustrated because that's not what they want to hear.
But that's the truth.
That's the truth, and that's the right answer.
I'm a red Syrah Carignan type of person. You like the bubblies.
I
It's
like
all good.
everything. I like everything. I like everything. I just, I love bubblies. I love red wine too. I love white wine. I think it's part of what I try to, teach to people is that it's a big world of wine. And, in the kosher world, we're really still just scratching the surface. No matter how far we've come in the last half century, we're scratching the surface of available wines, of available regions, which is changing rapidly. But people are so fixed to the idea of only drinking what they know and what they think they like. Meaning, like, I only want cab or a California cab. Like, there's so much good wine. Try something else, experiment, see what you like. But you got to try them.
Absolutely. It has been an absolute pleasure to spend this time with you today.
Always.
And to you, if you're still listening, email us, kosherwinepodcast@gmail.com. we're going to do a thing. How about this, Kenny? You ready? If you email us, we will just say your name on air because we know you like to hear your name. Just say, this is my name. Say my name in the podcast, and we'll just say your name.
Should we do that next? Because there's so many comments that'll take up the entire podcast just mentioning names. The hundreds and hundreds of people I hear from every week. No, but for real, last week, lots and lots of comments. Lots of comments. All, just really were enthralled.
So how
So
about this? If you send us a comment and you want us to mention your name, just tell us, and we'll
I
mention your
like
name.
that. I like that.
Because I don't want to mention somebody's name who doesn't wants to stay
Right.
anonymous.
Right. And we like name dropping.
We love name dropping.
It was great talking to you.
Have a great week,
Have
and
a great job.
can't wait to hear what you're going to drink on Shabbos.
I got to start thinking about it now.
Me too.
All right. Looking forward. Have a great Shabbos.